traditional funding models for NGOs that are interested in trying to create new protected areas would often be you would find an area that was of high priority, and then you would have to go out and actively fundraise and mobilize donor resources to actually be able to undertake the work of creating a new protected area. At CI, some forward-thinking folks said, well, what if we as an international NGO with our networks and our partners actually had the sort of the networking capital to be able to go out and proactively identify some of these opportunities and develop them. That seems like it would create some agility and flexibility. So that was really the sort of the breakthrough for GCF and our approach to mobilizing resources for protected areas. It was pretty cutting edge thinking that went into GCF, and I think we also recognized from the outset that there are a lot of ways to achieve what we would call long-term conservation tenure. So when we talk about protected areas, it wasn't just public protected areas on public lands, it was also looking at long-term conservation leases or concessions. It was also looking at community-owned conservation areas, also looking at even privately owned conservation areas. So we really tried to take a very broad view of how do you achieve sort of lasting protection of nature. One of the interesting design features of GCF was that we, from the outset, said that we would address what you call the paper park crisis, where if you look at the map of the world and you look at the protected area database, you see all of these protected areas that are there, right? They have they're delimited on a map, but beyond that, they don't have the resources, they don't have the capacity, they're not being effectively managed. So we said we want to address that in a way that we can provide sustained technical and financial resources to these protected areas in a way that helps them to sort of develop over time and sort of start achieving management effectiveness. And then on sort of the back end, to be able to work with these protected areas on some form of long-term financing or sustainable financing. So primarily, we address that through the creation of conservation trust funds or endowments. Basically, the principle behind an endowment is quite simple. You put some capital into an account, and it's invested by professionals who are able to generate an annual return by exposing that capital to international markets. And a good investor can get you a financial return and can produce sort of a steady, reliable stream of income annually. And you can use that income to support some of your core basic operating costs for a conservation area, for a protected area. To date, we've granted just about $70 million and worked with 50 partner organizations in 34 countries. Set up about 22 endowments at this point, and it's always nice to be able to put out those impressive statistics about your impact 12 years into a program. But I want to assure you that we've had plenty of failures too. We've had a lot of projects that didn't work. We've had some grants that we'd love to have back. But so what was nice about the relationship with the Moore Foundation was that in our leadership was that there was some appetite for risk or taking chances. We were sort of feeling like we had the ability to try new things and to go into places that generally some donors wouldn't necessarily go into due to sort of the risk factors and risk criteria and working at certain levels of capacity and governance. So again, perpetuity is really just, I think that's for conservation finance, it's the holy grail of sorts. It's sort of like, can you really get to a place where you can say that a protected area or network of protected areas is really, truly sustainably financed, where we believe that if the practitioners on the ground, the protected area managers, if they don't have to worry constantly about where next year's budget is going from, that is going to allow them the flexibility, the agility to really be able to do more with respect to actually managing the protected area, right? And to be able to retain talent, to retain staff, to be able to really do forward thinking and forward planning on how these protected areas can provide these services to human well-being, right? To sort of like broaden their reach to really look at what are the values and being able to say how these protected areas do directly benefit people. You know, because it's very difficult for certain practitioners on the ground who are stretched on a budget to really do anything but the day-to-day of just trying to operate a protected area, right? And to keep it running and to sort of just address the basic daily pressures on these places. So it was a forward-thinking model, and I think it's, you know, met with some success. But, you know, there's always more work and more resources that are needed for these places. So again, just to touch on some of the design elements of GCF programs and things that we would really focus on, we really try to work with protected area practitioners to think of their protected areas as a sort of a business in an entrepreneurial fashion, to really invest in business planning and doing some good sort of cost modeling, and also looking at what are the, you know, potential other revenue streams that can be generated by protected areas. So several GCF projects have sort of gone on to develop payments for environmental services, including RED+, some water schemes as well. If you're really giving the practitioners that opportunity and flexibility to go and really try to think strategically about what are those revenue streams that can be realized by protected areas, well, that's going to help you answer your sustainable financing equation. And the other thing that we found in our work is working with a lot of these conservation trust funds. So many countries like Mexico, for example, and Peru and Colombia have these very, very dynamic environmental funds that are set up really to manage, administer, and attract funding for protected areas and for environment. We found that partnering with these organizations and often setting up endowment funds with these organizations can have really powerful spill-on effects, because these are dynamic institutions that are capable of attracting additional resources and additional capital for those purposes. So really do think that there's a tremendous sort of benefit or advantage to building up that network of conservation trust funds and giving them sort of the resources that they need to really go out and be able to try to attract additional capital to support protected areas. So basically, we decided if we were going to sort of work with this portfolio of protected areas across the globe, that we should be investing in sort of building up a sort of a body of experience and a story about sort of the collective impact that we as a program are having on the sort of the global protected area agenda. We've invested quite a lot in sort of doing you know, good low-cost monitoring of the sort of the management effectiveness of the protected areas that we have invested in. And on top of that, we're always monitoring regularly sort of the funds, the endowments that we've invested in, tracking their performance as well over time, and then making sure that the relationship between the endowment funds and the protected areas on the ground is working, right? That they're communicating and that the funding is actually getting administered to the protected area in a reliable and predictable manner. So we spend quite a bit of time sort of with our aggregate portfolio, just being able to say a little bit about sort of what we've sort of accomplished from a global perspective. You know, we've had currently have protected areas that our financial support has helped to create over 80 million hectares of new protected areas. So that's a little bump toward in the 2010 Aichi targets. We're obviously mindful that that is still nowhere near enough, but it is significant. I mean, the challenge of GCF has been, you know, how much can we really stretch a dollar, and how much can we really get from a leverage perspective for every dollar that we spend. So basically, one of the principles of GCF has really been, how do we leverage the money that we invest? So when it comes time, particularly for us to invest in an endowment, are there cases where we can attract additional donors, attract additional capital to help us achieve long-term financing for protected areas that we are working with? We have some nice examples, like for instance, in the country of Guyana, we had been funding CI Guyana, Conservation International Guyana, and some partners on the ground to work on protected areas on the ground, helping to get those protected areas created, up and running, and then building the management systems and management frameworks for those protected areas. And basically, that resulted in basically the government of Guyana creating a protected area system. It was the last country in the Western Hemisphere to have a national protected area system, and then created more recently a National Protected Areas Fund that we were able to contribute capital with, along with some other donors. And so we have pretty powerful examples like that we're really trying to do more of. And the other thing that we look for in sort of the leverage aspect is really the sort of what are policy transformations that maybe we can help with when we're supporting these efforts on the ground. So for instance, in Indonesia and Sumatra, we're working with a local partner organization there who found a new way to create a long-term conservation lease in forests that's designated as production forests. It's an ecosystem restoration license, and that license model has gone on to be used by over 10 organizations now that have found ways to get long-term conservation leases on forests that's designated as production forest in Indonesia. So there are nice policy transformations that we're able to try to generate from consistent sort of support from GCF. So quickly, lessons are really just that endowments are not a panacea. It's great to be able to create an endowment, but rarely do you have a situation where an endowment is going to provide for 100% of protected areas' needs or their cost basis. So you really need to be thinking in an entrepreneurial sense about what are those other revenue streams, and can you build a platform to generate additional capital and generate additional revenue streams to help support protected areas. I think that's a big lesson, and I think the other thing that we've probably learned, again, is that it helps to be able to be sort of flexible and agile and be able to sort of go out and proactively seek these opportunities that do exist to try to create new protected areas. However, sometimes that's the easy part almost. The sense that you need to sustain your level of effort and sustain the funding to really be able to say that you're going to achieve some form of sustainability. And sometimes these processes can take years where you're building up the capacity of these areas to undertake conservation and then working with them to do something on sustainable financing. It's a lot of skills, a lot of capacities that are required. And so several of our projects, the funding cycle for several of our projects has gone on between 7 to 10 years. So I guess it's called patient capital is what the term is. And we've learned a lot about patience, and I think, in many cases that's really what's required, and just that sort of level of attention and support that you need to give to some of these projects. And in future directions, the dream is obviously to take all those lessons you've learned over the last 12 years and to be able to do it better and do it again. And that's going to require us, obviously, to raise new capital. And there is an effort at CI underway to sort of raise a second funding for a second phase of GCF. And we'll be thinking more strategically and creatively about how do you generate these platforms for sustainable financing for protected areas in some of those high priority places where we're all working.